What's up, YouTubers? Today we're going to talk a little bit about high impact ceramic. I think it's HIC 40. I don't know. I'll link below the link to the Spyderco site where you can buy this mule. This is the mule. The mule series is basically it's kind of a consistent form factor, fixed blade where they can test steels, different materials. Like in this case, it's high impact ceramic. So it can take a little bit more high impact. Am I going to be batoning wood and beating on this? No, not very smart. It is still ceramic after all, but it is designed under high pressures or built under high pressure and, designed to take a lot more. So this is something you might be able to drop, I'm not going to do it. This is a little bit more pricey. This particular model is $150, or at least it was when I bought it. Like I said, I'll link the price below. And it's just their common mule series though, and it is a little bit wider blade stock, so I don't want to say blade stock, but blade make, in the sense that it does require its own bolt-around sheath. I did not buy the separate one. I just went ahead and just overstretched mine, and yeah, so now my other mules will slip out a little bit easier, but I don't really care. And honestly, I pretty much, when I do carry those, I put them into the leather one. So yeah, it doesn't come with a bolt-on. You do have to buy that separately. So and it does have its own separate one. Do watch for that if you get this. So what's the use case for high impact ceramic? Again, in this case, the fixed blade. They make kitchen blades out of them. I refer you to Pete over at CedricAda Outdoors. He has actually done some work with these, including like sharpening them, putting edges on them. And it's not a typical progression where you go from like a high grit, diamond. By the way, you're going to have to use diamond. Obviously, ceramics and the likes are not going to hone or sharpen this. Put an edge back on. So in any case, you don't necessarily go through a high grit to a low. You just really start low, and you spend time on the low, essentially just grinding down and creating. You don't necessarily create a burr, of course. You just make a sharpened edge. Like, you literally just imagine you don't form an apex, and you just kind of work this down, and that's if it dulls. This is probably not going to dull through use, though. I found through several months of use, and I'll talk about my particular use case where I kind of tried it out. I did try it on things like boxes and stuff. You saw that I put that at the front side, just an example. And where it fails is, actually, you know what? We'll go. Typical is, let me go ahead and do a comparison of the use case here. So this is the Creeley knives, omnivore, used in the kitchen, MagnaCut HRC, I think 61 to 63-ish. It's got a chisel grind edge, very thin blade stock, and it's our favorite kitchen one. It does hold the edge the longest of all those. I have other Nichols and Nitro V, and it's just the best. It's one of the smaller ones, but you can notice this one's extremely small. So really, my test case was on peppers. I tried it on tomatoes. It wasn't so good. And then things like onions. Great on onions. You could sit there all day long and do that. You can do that on onions literally an entire, probably year. And you're not going to have to do any sharpening on this one. So that's an onion which has, a very firm cellular structure. And you can you just need to start going through it, and you can just push through it. With this, that's a great use case for it. Super thin slicing of tomatoes, not so good. Just because, you know what, I will jump into this. It's going to be jump around. This knife, don't panic. I've tried this. I'm not pressing too hard, but you can see that I'm pressing hard enough. I would never ever do that with any of my other kitchen knives made of steel. But because there's really not teeth on this high impact ceramic, it's very smooth. Again, it's a nice little peak there, but it's very smooth. So there's no teeth that necessarily bite into things like this. That's why it didn't do really good for thin slices of tomatoes and the things like that. Great for chopping up onions. You could just sit there and do that for a lifetime. So that would definitely be one of the scenarios that, I definitely see it being useful. Very useful in camp. Definitely because ceramic, not going to rust. This, you're not going to have to sharpen it. If you're one of those people like me, kind of a lazy camper, you like to put together at the beginning of the season a big square box and throw something in there, this could be your knife. And instead of having to even sharpen it once a season or whatever, you could probably go lifetime. You could literally just throw this in there. It would always be sharp enough to get you through anything you do camping, scaling a fish. Again, it has enough good grab from that perspective that it would scale a fish nice, cut a fish nice if you were cleaning it. So those scenarios where you don't ever want to have to sharpen, I think this is actually a very useful knife and not a ridiculous price at $150. Again, you're paying for the new technology and that sort of stuff that goes behind it. So where I would say is it's a little bit weak or just less satisfying is it did cut cardboard. It did much better in line with cardboard, but across basically the grains, you can see it does a little bit more tearing and not a fine bite. And that's because, once again, it doesn't have those teeth. It has the angle, doesn't have the teeth. So those particular use cases wouldn't be good. If you had to cut, like, let's say, I don't know, you were an electrician or something and you needed to cut through some copper cables, I think it'd be really good for that. You could just, cut things off, things like that, sheathing, and never have to worry about it. Would it be my preferred one? Maybe not, but I think it would be very satisfactory. And again, the big thing in that situation is you'd want to be careful that you don't have like concrete backing, that you have something like a cutting board or at least cardboard underneath if you're going to be cutting through a lot of stuff, in kind of an industrial sort of use for this high impact ceramic. So on the whole, what I would say is, and when I cut through peppers, that's when I first noticed it, and I did film that, put that on the front side here, is cutting through the peppers. The skin, just to get through the skin, you kind of had to push a little bit, and you kind of, basically, a saw motion didn't help. Again, because it doesn't have any teeth, you just kind of had to do it until you had enough pressure, and then it started to go through it. So it does work as a cutting tool. It would work, if you did want to, basically process some wood, make feather sticking, as good as any flat grind and a V-edge is going to do for you. It's going to do as good as those. In fact, it did do as well as the Bush Friend 2000, which is a review I'm going to be having coming up soon. It did actually do that sort of thing as good as that kind of a knife, And so I was like, okay, it processes wood, but when you do need to slice through something and you need that bite, it just doesn't have it. So I'd say on the whole, the use case for this is for a lazy camper. You want something that's going to be tough enough that can beat around in your box if you're going four-wheeling, from site to site, year after year. Don't have to worry about it rusting or anything like that. Don't have to do any maintenance or sharpening or honing of this knife. I think it's a very solid use case with this high impact ceramic. Like I said, it just doesn't have that really fun fine sharp where you've seen those, the cut test through like paper towels and things like that, where it just doesn't have that bite. So yeah, I think that's a feasible use case. A little bit of a high price, but like I said, for never ever having to do any of that maintenance on it all, not bad. So on the whole, I'd probably, I'd say this is definitely above a meh, but I'd probably say that, this is like not something super exciting, but yeah, I definitely see a use case for that. So hope this was interesting, if not entertaining. Appreciate your time and the like and subscribe if you get a chance. Thanks.